heavy episode today. Memoirs from the I Love Me book. People think the infantry is only about kicking in doors and like going to wars, but one of the most sacred missions I ever carried out started with a single phone call. It was called the funeral detail. Whenever you see like a military honors being performed at a funeral, where you have like the color guard and the guns going off and folding of the flag, before any of that can happen, notification has to happen. And it kind of looks like this. You know, you have a service member that passes away and that family requests, or it's that service member's request or family's request that he be buried, or he or she be buried with military honors. And that's what comes with the color guard and all that stuff. That phone call goes typically from funeral home director to the closest military installation. There's this office, it's called like, I believe it's still called like the Casualty Notification Office. Their entire job on the earth is to manage incoming transmissions and phone calls that's notifying them that a service member has passed away. And their job is then to reach out to a unit that is tasked during like what is usually called like red cycle. Your only job on earth during red cycle taskings is to do like area beautification for post installation, whatever you want to call it, cutting grass, picking up trash, details for retirement ceremonies. And then one of those critical tasks that you have to be ready for is casualty notification. Officer tasks that result in an honor team to go and perform military rites at a veteran's funeral. How it goes is the request comes in from the Casualty Notification Office down to the unit responsible for the tasking. Unit identifies their team, and then the most senior non-commissioned officer of that team is going to go make contact with the Casualty Notification Office to receive the tasking. And then that NCO becomes responsible for everything from that point on. One of the most important responsibilities wasn't drill, it was calling the family. The senior NCO would personally contact what they call the next of kin, the next surviving member of that family. Ask that family member, like, what are your needs? After finding out what the needs of the family would be, you know, that senior NCO would then inform the family, here's exactly how the process looks from the date we link up to collect the casket from the funeral home to presenting it at wherever the ceremony is going to be. Some people have a church ceremony or a memorial service first, and then they go to the cemetery. So there's that whole process. So the senior non-commissioned officer is going to personally contact the next of kin, which is like the next family member that has survived their loss. The senior non-commissioned officer is going to ask the family like if they have any special requests or needs. Then that senior non-commissioned officer will explain exactly what it is that that team will provide for that family, or from that moment of contact on through and after the services are complete. And make sure that like, it's really important that that non-commissioned officer ensures that everything was aligned with the family's wishes. Like if they have a special request, how can we make that possible? Because this is it. So now we go into kind of after that contact has been made with the family member. The next thing is actually performing the ceremony. So the quiet professionalism of the team, like a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't see, is that the team will typically arrive before everybody else, meeting the funeral home vehicle and the director at the site of wherever the memorial is. You know, there's no stress around it for the family. You know, they don't have to watch a bunch of military people coming in, moving around. We're outside waiting on the funeral director to get there. When the funeral home vehicle arrives, the casket is received, you know, the door opens, and then the team places themselves on each side. Like you see pallbearers do, there's 3 on each side of the casket, and then the senior non-commissioned officer would be at the head of the casket. He always carried the flag. We would roll the deceased service member's casket out of the vehicle, gently place the flag on the coffin, and we would do all of that before the family ever saw us. We were already there. So carrying the casket from the vehicle to the ceremony location, there's an awesome amount of responsibility that goes into placing your hands on a casket and being responsible for the movement of that casket. It chokes me up, man, because like I think about how many times like we did this over my career, and now that I'm out and removed, I think I have a different appreciation for the professionalism required to carry out such a tough mission. Finished up with the memorial ceremony. They opened the doors, and this little girl she came out, and she just ran, and she just tried to hold my hand as I'm at the position of attention. But it's heartbreaking because you see how death is weighing on a family in real time. The doors open, we're notified, hey, it's time to take the service member from here to load them back up in the funeral vehicle that's going to transport them from here to their final resting place. We reposition ourselves, we march back into where the service member has been displayed, or the casket is on display. And then we move that vehicle, or the casket, the exact same way, 3 on each side, senior leader at the head. We just kind of do it in reverse, right? Now we're moving from the ceremony location where the casket's on display back out to the vehicle, funeral director vehicle that's going to transport it, the casket to the final resting place. And then we repeat that entire process. You got to get from the funeral director's vehicle to the actual grave site. We carried that casket like pallbearers, but we carried it as representatives of the United States Army. Once we've transported the deceased service member's casket from the funeral director's vehicle at the cemetery to his or her final resting place, graveside, we get out of the way, but we would offset ourselves so that we would kind of be out of the way as much as possible. And then we would put ourselves in a linear formation, again, with the senior leader taking his position up the end on the right flank. What we would perform is essentially like a version of the 21 gun salute, but it's really called the 3 volley salute. And what that is you have seven soldiers with 7 rifles that fire 3 volleys of 1 round each. So it's a total of 21 rounds that are like fired. Then, I mean, I don't know if this is standard practice across the board, but this stuck with me as a private, and I continued it on as I became that senior leader, of picking up 3 spent shell casings from the rifles and like cleaning them off as best as possible, so that because those casings were going to go inside of the folded flag. This is probably one of the more heavier parts of the ceremony, because the military precision has to be on point. Like, there cannot be anybody that's a quarter of a second off from the other when it comes to firing a volley of rounds, because the last thing you want is a bunch of pop, 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 pop. You know, you want it to be one single action. Bang, bang, bang. You know, like, that is what you want. Like, you want everybody to sound the same at the exact same time, because again, it's about honoring the family and that service member, you know, and they deserve our absolute best after giving their absolute best. Yeah, give me a minute. So taps is next, and taps would be played. So after the shell casings are collected, taps would be played. Sometimes taps would be played by a live bugler or live trumpet, and sometimes a PA system. Either way, it was going to be played. There's something about hearing taps at a gravesite that just silences every single thing inside of you that's going on. Like, time stops. After taps is played, our senior leader gives us the command of stacking arms, and really what that looks like is kind of creating TP with your rifles. The reason why we got to stack arms is because the next step in this process for the ceremony is going from the 3-gun volley over to the gravesite because now it's time to position ourselves to be able to fold that American flag. So we march over to the gravesite, and then as soon as we get to the casket, we split. We split so that there's 3 people, 3 soldiers from that team on each side of that casket at the gravesite. And then the senior leader of that team places himself at the head of the casket. It's always the head because that's going to be the last part of the flag that's folded. I remember us all being on each side. We would give a silent command that only we would hear. Secure would be the preparatory command, and then flag would be like the command of execution. So as soon as you heard secure, you knew as soon as you heard that next part, flag, that you were going to grab that flag, right? So secure flag, boom, hands are out, everybody at the exact same time. You'd be given the next command, you'd essentially take a step back, right? So it'd be like ready, back, and everybody would take 1 step back, and that would stretch that, and it would be like so precise that you would hear a pop, because that flag would pop because we would rip it so fast to create such tension on it so that it didn't flap around, because that's the last thing you would want is for you to grab it loosely and have too much of a sag to where if there was wind coming, it could like essentially maybe even dislodge it from your hand. And you don't want that because, man, that's just not what you want. So you're gripping it nice and hard, you're getting the command, you pull it nice and tight, and then the next commands you're gonna get is fold, right? So it'd be ready. So ready, fold, again, command preparation command, command of execution. So ready lets you know you're about to fold. And how we would do it is like, it's a big flag, right? So whenever we would fold in, right, it's like you're taking a step forward, right? So we get the flag off the coffin or off the casket, we get told ready, back, everybody goes back. Now we got to fold the flag in half, all right? So it's like ready, fold, right? Everybody comes together, then ready, back, and it flattens the flag back out, and you got to fold it over 1 more time. So it's like ready, fold, back in the middle, and now it's like ready, back. Now everybody's tight, right? There's tight, the hands are over the casket, right? You have 0 wiggle room at this point. So it's like you're holding on with a death grip to the American flag. And then you start the folding process, and it is literally ready, fold, ready, fold, ready, fold, ready, fold. And everybody knows when they need to take the flag and fold the flag because it's a command of execution. Like I said, the family never hears this because it's so silent. It's like ready, fold, ready, fold. And then you smooth it out and flatten it out and then fold it, right? So the family never hears any of this, but like you're doing all these commands, you're getting the flag folded, and then it gets all the way up to the head of the casket where the senior non-commissioned officer is. The flag is as folded as good as it can be, and the last person that was the folder, the last folding part of that, had the responsibility of handling that flag and then presenting it to that senior leader, a senior non-commissioned officer, so that he could then inspect that flag to make sure it was perfectly folded, like no bulges anywhere, and that there was nothing showing other than blue and white stars, right? Because that is the standard. The senior non-commissioned officer was like good to go with it, and I mean, he's checking every side, like precision, spinning it each way, flipping it over, tightening it up as he does it. And then at the very end, he takes those 3 shell casings from the 3-gun volley, and he places those shell casings inside the American flag. It had to be perfect, like not almost perfect, perfect. So now as the senior NCO has inspected the flag, deemed it to be perfectly folded, and inserted the 3 shell casings, the senior NCO then does an about face and then marches calmly and deliberately towards the family, to that last, to the person that's receiving the honors. And then he takes a knee, and then he presents the flag to that family member. And he says the words, very slowly, but very deliberately and meaningful to the family. And what that senior leader says is, on behalf of the President of the United States and the United States Army and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. I mean, that's heavy, man. So as soon as he says that, the family member, once they take possession of that flag, that senior leader is going to take his hands off of the flag, stand up, assume the position of attention, and then render that final salute to that family member, to that flag. About to cry over here. That salute wasn't just for that soldier that passed away. It's for the family too. So the senior leader marches back to the gravesite where the rest of the team, the other 6 members of that funeral detail team are, and gives them some commands. It's the same thing. Right now we gotta march back the way we came, kind of get out of the way, right? So commands are given, the team marches off, and the family is left to grieve privately. But there was one funeral that stayed with me. That was the very first funeral detail that I was ever a part of. And I was a brand new private to a unit. I'll never forget how emotional like the first funeral detail can be. And I think I remember it so much because of just everything, the totality of, there was this guy who had, the service member that had came home from Korea, and he was driving home to see his family when he got into a car wreck and ultimately passed away. And then you meet that family and you realize like how fast life can just be over, like how like this life is but a vapor. You know, this is like one of those very first moments in the Army where I realized, I was like, man, we don't know how much time we have. You live recklessly, you know, like when you're in your teens and 20s, and it's like, this was kind of that wake-up call. Everything that I've kind of been talking to you about is like from my memory of the very first funeral I did that I was a part of. Why that's important is after we were done performing the funeral detail for the family, we left, we came back home, you know, to our regularly scheduled lives. About a month and a half later, the 7 of us that were on that funeral detail received a letter. Family wrote a personal letter to the chief casualty care officer or command, the mortuary affairs officer for the installation of Fort Polk, Louisiana. And that letter triggered such an emotional response that the commanding general, Jason Kamiya at the time, he wrote the 7 of us a personal, typed out a personal letter of commendation to us, thanking us for our service and how we represented. You know, I'm going to read that right here. It's boom. And it says, "Dear Private Jarvis," that's right, I was a brand new private. "It is with great pleasure I share with you the enclosed correspondence from the family of Sergeant Cotton, U.S. Army active duty. You are to be commended for your dedication and professionalism while serving with the funeral detail for Sergeant Cotton, U.S. Army active duty. Please accept my thanks for a job well done. Sincerely, General, or Jason Kamiya, Brigadier General, U.S. Army Commanding." And that's when I understood something. The weight of responsibility representing the Army in a grateful nation was just, it's like hard to adequately emphasize and articulate the emotion that goes into preparing for a funeral where you know that they deserve perfection. Looking back, I think I'm even amazed not that like we took it so seriously in preparation for each funeral that we did, or this one even in particular, but it's almost like we took it on as if it was our own family member that we were doing the ceremony for, because that was a soldier, right? One team, one fight. I think just the weight of that was so huge that it focused us, it intensely focused us to give our absolute best, performing at the absolute highest level possible. And then the emotional control that's like required in a situation like a little girl trying to hold your hand. It's like it's a lot of emotions that you face for the first time, and then maybe you keep doing it throughout your career, and I don't think you really ever get numb to it because it's such a personal loss that we can all relate to. As a young infantryman, I thought service was about fighting. That detail, war tests a soldier's courage, funeral honors his character. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. I want to thank all of you for being part of this journey through my military career, and hopefully, you know, through me sharing my experiences with my time in the Army. The Army is like a career in the military is so much more than just showing up, getting your hair buzzed off, and then going to war. It's all these other details that remind us so deeply that the reason why we're serving is for a much larger reason. But as always, I appreciate you hanging out with me and going through a real pivotal memory in my life and in my career as a United States Army infantryman. So thanks a lot. Are we frickin' hugging? All right, get out of here. Go on. Say goodbye to the people.